right, hello and welcome again to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today we're glad to be joined by Michael Boccadoro, Executive Director of California Dairy Cares. Michael, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so kind of before, we were just talking, you've been in Sacramento lobbying and, working around the legislature for 41 years. Was that right? 41 years.
41 years.
Take us back 41 years. How did you get involved up here?
I got involved as an intern when I was a student at UC Davis. My first internship was with Speaker Brown's office back in the day. Spent 2 years doing internships and received an offer for a full-time staff job upon graduation from UC Davis. So I've been here since 1983.
Really? So what was your first staff job?
First staff job was working on ag and water issues in Speaker Brown's office as a paid intern.
Right. And kind of a Hall of Fame staff back then.
It was a Hall of Fame staff, without a doubt. Michael Boccadoro as chief of staff. Mm-hmm. I was working under somebody who I still think is one of the best lobbyists in Sacramento, Jack Walco. Mm-hmm. It was a really great opportunity for me and great mentors for me as I was getting started in this line of work.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when you kind of look around town and see who's who or what's going on, and they all kind of emanated from right where you did.
Yeah, it's been helpful because I got job offers and I got interviews because of who I listed as references on my resume back in the day.
Right. And so, you were, I guess, drawn. Were you just happened to land in dairy? Was it because you went to UC Davis? And
I happened to land in dairy. I come from a little bit of an ag background. I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley before going to Davis, and
what part?
Just outside of Stockton, Lodi area.
Okay.
And went to high school down there, and started at Davis. Went in as pre-med and came out poli-sci and econ. So it's one of those massive transformations in terms of...
What led to that transfer?
Just being exposed
Homework?
being exposed. Yeah, that part of it was, OChem was definitely a big
Right.
piece of it. But a lot of it was just being exposed to economics, which I wasn't really exposed to in high school. Mm-hmm. Found that I really, was attracted to that aspect of the economy. And so it just seemed like a natural transition for me. I thought about law school quite a bit, was accepted to some law programs, but decided just to stay working with the legislature. I left the legislature in 1990 after 7 years, and I've been lobbying ever since.
And so kind of when you left the legislature, kind of what was your kind of first role kind of exiting?
So I opened an office for a LA-based public affairs firm back in the day. They had several clients. My job was to grow their business here in Sacramento. I split from that firm about 10 years ago, and not really split. It was more of a natural transition time. My partners in LA were retiring. Mm-hmm. So it was an opportunity for me to take my half of the company separate. And so it's been a good experience, to say the least.
So for 30 years, you were, I guess not doing lobbying, but doing kind of public affairs stuff?
Public affairs and lobbying. Yeah. So our firm's always done a little bit of both. On behalf of our clients. So we're not just doing the legislative stuff. We're doing a lot of regulatory work, and then some of the public relations work that naturally feeds into a successful lobbying campaign. So.
Right. Not a lot of people, I guess, do the regulatory work and the lobbying work. And I think what the public doesn't know is, how much of your work is in the regulatory world versus, the legislature.
So I've got a business partner who manages most of the legislative work, mm-hmm. and I've got a focus now almost exclusively, 75-80% of my time spent on the regulatory side. So working with the Public Utilities Commission, the Air Resources Board, Department of Food and Ag, the Energy Commission.
Right.
It's endless. Water, Department of Water Resources, State Water Resources Control Board. It's endless.
Right.
The amount of work that needs to be done at each of these agencies on behalf of our clients. So and our clients really appreciate that we have that expertise and not just access, but actual policy expertise in those areas.
Because it's amazing, California is the agricultural capital of the world, right? We produce more, food and, dairy and all that than anywhere else. Yet the amount of regulatory stuff you guys got to go through is amazing. But you do what you just listed. Basically it touches everything.
It does touch everything, and the permits that our dairies have to achieve or farmers have to achieve. Now with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, that's having a significant impact on water availability. We've got endangered species issues in the Delta that impacts surface water supplies. So, this is a very, very complicated and difficult place to farm, and it's getting more complicated and more difficult as we go forward. 40 years ago when I got started, working with a Valley Democrat, who represented the Fresno area, it was a lot different back then. And the Rural Caucus was a major political force.
Right.
Rural Caucus, I don't even think exists anymore.
I was like, what is that? Who is that?
And then the Rural Caucus were, basically, moderate Democrats from the Valley with a bunch of their Republican colleagues who also represented the San Joaquin Valley. Ken Mattey's a great example as a Republican Senate Majority Leader back in the day. Roseanne Vuitch, who was in the Senate, very, very significant players in policy that happened to come from the rural areas of the state. There were actually 31 rural members of the Rural Caucus. So it was a significant force, and they were in the middle of most policy discussions because there were so many of them.
Yeah.
Times change.
Yeah, so we've had a couple guests on, talking water, talking agriculture, and members as well, kind of talking the same issues, and kind of the same thing they talk about is, the big city LA folk, the big city LA members just don't understand the Valley and and it kind of screams out then like, why is there not a rural caucus kind of, bringing this forward again? Like, why aren't these rural members kind of banding together, kind of working together like this?
And they are a little bit. I think the Problem Solvers Caucus has taken over some of that because that's a bipartisan caucus. The Mods is strictly a Democratic caucus, but for the most part, so there are slightly different variations. Part of it is just, I think, fewer rural members. There used to be 31. I don't know that we could get to 15 today in terms of the growth that's occurred on our coastal areas. So most of the legislators are now from, coastal areas or inland areas with significant population. Rural's really kind of been pushed out.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's different. The world has changed a bit.
Yeah.
So kind of California Dairy Cares. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that and kind of what the work you guys are doing?
Sure. Dairy Cares was started over 20 years ago with the sole focus to work on dairy sustainability issues. It involves the entire industry here in California, the trade groups that represent the dairy farm families in the state, the processors that produce milk, butter, cheese, and other commodities, the major cooperatives that operate here, California Dairies Inc., Land O'Lakes, Dairy Farmers of America. So it's the entire industry sitting around a table for the past 20 years with the sole focus of working on environmental sustainability issues. So finding ways we can make our dairies even more sustainable as we move forward. And, the role has taken on a very significant aspect here in California because we've got a progressive state that's focused more than any other state and frankly, probably more than any other country on environmental issues. And so having experts that can facilitate and help the industry deal with the state's changing demands on farms and find ways to be creative and trying to find a way to do it all that doesn't put us out of business.
Right.
I think that's a key aspect of it, right? When we think about environmental sustainability, we also have to think about economic sustainability. Because if you put requirements on farms that are simply too much for them to be able to deal with and still be competitive in the marketplace, you've not benefited anyone. You've lost jobs, you've lost revenue, you've lost farms. Farming's a way of life for these families. So it's very detrimental from their standpoint, not only losing a job, but they're losing a lifestyle.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I remember my dad was from Wisconsin, and I remember his relatives from Wisconsin would always get angry about California surpassing them as the number one cheese producer, number one milk producer.
Yeah.
Kind of tell us about what is the scope of California's, dairy production and, where we rank. And
great question. So the dairy sector in California is the largest dairy sector anywhere in the U.S., bigger than even Wisconsin, home of the cheeseheads. I think Wisconsin still is close on cheese. But in terms of overall dairy production, California is the hands down leader. About 19% of all dairy products are produced in milk are produced here in California for the entire country. So it's very significant, probably got as high as 20%, and it's declined a little bit the last couple of years. We're starting to see some attrition where we've got fewer cows in California. Milk production has held relatively flat, but milk production across the country is continuing to grow to meet growing demand.
And kind of what is the kind of the growth in demand for milk right now?
It's For dairy, it's significant. Yes. It isn't so much in fluid milk. A lot of the growth now is in butter, cheese, ice cream, cottage cheese, and other products that you can make with milk. And so we've seen tremendous ongoing demand both here in the U.S.
The yogurt section is
overwhelming, right? Different types of yogurt, lots of different textures, lots of fans. The cheese section is somewhat overwhelming, but wonderful to have all those options that we currently have here in the state, in the country. And then demand is growing globally as well. So as countries' economic development moves forward and they have more disposable income, they want to spend that on meat and dairy to get their protein from something other than beans that they've gotten it from in the past. So as their incomes expand and these countries develop, we see them constantly turning to increased demand for dairy, beef, and other livestock-related commodities.
Yeah. What is the kind of the global export kind of picture for California dairy?
It's a big part of the markets for California dairy products, without a doubt, and a growing portion for particularly a state like California that's on the coast, and we have access to ports and access to export markets. So Mexico is a large trading partner of ours. Asia is a growing market constantly. Europeans produce a lot of their own, so less of a market there. Same thing with Australia and New Zealand. They tend to be more competitors than markets. Those countries export a lot of product as well as the U.S.
Yeah. I remember there used to be ads like happy cows live in California. Kind of why is California such a good place for dairy?
California is a good place for farming generally. We've got lots of land. It's lots of opportunity to produce feed crops for dairies. But one of the other really interesting things, about 40% of what we feed here in California is what we call byproducts of other agricultural production. And you can't get that anywhere else because California is the breadbasket. We have 250 commodities here, and all those commodities have waste associated with them. So whether it's a cold carrot or pomegranate waste or waste from wineries, that all becomes perfectly appropriate dairy feed for cattle.
Right.
And it's a wonderful advantage that we have here in the state. The rest of the country, it's less than 20%. Here it's 40.
Yeah.
So it's a huge advantage. It's one of the few advantages we have. Most of our input costs here in California tend to be a little higher, but we have a great weather for it as well. It gets a little hot in the summer, but the fact that it's much more mild compared to Wisconsin and some of the other states,
right.
It's much harder on cattle. Cattle are like people. We like moderate, temperate climates. Mm-hmm. And so, keeping cows cool in the summer here in California is a big piece of what we do, and probably going to be a bigger piece as we go forward and we see, increasing heat waves. So that's an important piece. But in the wintertime, even though it does rain here, we're not getting a lot of snow in Fresno like they do in Wisconsin or Michigan or some of the other states where we see a lot of dairy production. So it's a good place to be dairy farming.
And kind of what's the picture? Like, how many cows are we talking about here in the state of California?
So just on the dairy side, I can't really speak to the beef side as well, but here on the dairy side, we grew to about 1.88 million milk cows, and then roughly about the same number of support stock to replace those cows as those cows needed to be replaced in the dairy farms. Today, it's declined a little bit. We're probably at about 1.675 million milk cows in the state. So we've seen a little bit of attrition. We're able to get a little more out of cows every year just through efficiency, a lot of that through breeding. Mm-hmm. And so, cows become a little more productive each year, about 1%. So as long as we're not seeing attrition exceed about 1% per year, we can keep up with our production. But, the U.S. is seeing growing production, so we're actually seeing a small decline in our percentage share of what's going on nationally.
Yeah. Kind of I know there used to be like a lot of small farms and then a lot of bigger farms.
Yep.
Can you bring us through kind of like the picture of California's dairy industry and kind of how it works together regulatory-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. And it works together as an industry, and it works together with the rest of ag because we become a home for some of these waste products that other parts of the industry have that don't have to be landfilled because we've got cattle that we can feed winery waste to and citrus pulp to and different things. But the dairy industry has really transformed quite a bit here in California and across the U.S. We had at one point had about 20,000 dairies here in California 50, 60, 70 years ago. Today, we've got about 1,200. So a significant decline in the number of dairies. The size of dairies has increased during that same period of time. It went from 20,000 dairies with about 50 cows, a little less than 50, to 1,200 dairies now averaging over 1,500 cows per dairy. So we've seen some consolidation, largely because of the demands that are put on our farms here. Wisconsin, the number's probably closer to 250 on average. And a lot of those, have been a lot longer established. Dairy came to California sort of late in the process. Wisconsin got a head start on us with the whole dairy farming, but we had a lot of growth between 1970 and 2000, 2010 here in California. And now we're starting to see that peak and decline a little bit, but it's still a very big industry, and it's one that's going to continue. We're going to continue to see consolidation. We lose a few small dairies every year. Once in a while, we lose a big dairy just because it becomes difficult for them to compete, or they run into water issues locally that they just don't have enough water to grow the crops that they need to dairy farm.
So I guess the last maybe 10 years, there's been kind of this kind of like anti-dairy swing where people are like almond milk and they want soy milk, but soy milks and then got bad, and then all these different nut milks and non-milks, and then people were like, oh well, that's better for the environment, and then people were like, oh no, not, because actually it's a lot more to process, a lot more, it's not as healthy for you. Kind of what is kind of the market, the sustainability of a cow versus like a nut milk?
So they both have their positives and negatives, without a doubt, when we look at the different types of milk that are on the market. The alternative milks are, less than 5% of the discussion, frankly. And so, it's an issue. They're out there. They're fine as choices for people, I think, at the end of the day. Nothing really replaces dairy milk in terms of its ability to provide a lot of nutrition in one package. And even now, as you were talking about earlier, some of the fortified milk products that we have can take what's naturally in dairy, make it a little better by taking out some of the sugar and adding in some additional protein and other nutrients, and enhancing the nutritional experience that we get with dairy milk. So it's it's just like everything, it kind of evolves. Fluid milk consumption has declined a little bit here in California and across the country. A lot of that has more to do with water and other beverage choices. We only drink so much every day, right? We only consume so much liquid, can consume so much liquid. And today, when you walk into a grocery store, not only is the yogurt aisle intimidating, the beverage aisle is probably even more intimidating. It's not an aisle. It's usually 5 aisles now in the middle of the grocery store. You got teas on one aisle, you've got sports drinks on another aisle, you've got boba, and endless other coffee drinks, endless opportunities for your beverage choices. And we also drink a lot more water, and we're constantly being told to drink even more water. And so the beverage market is very, very competitive. So fluid milk's seen a little decline, but people's consumption of cheese, butter, and the other products continues to increase. And cheese is the big one. Most of us love cheese with our wine here in California, so it's a good choice to have all these these opportunities and options.
Kind of talking a little bit about the environment, environmental aspects of a dairy. That's changed a lot, I'm sure, in the last few years. Can you kind of talk about kind of what you guys are doing on the sustainability front, and kind of it's kind of odd. The more you learn about global warming and things, it's like, you have a cow and it eats grass. It's all above the ground. It's not like, oil where you're taking, carbon from under the ground and releasing it.
Right.
But still, people are like, oh, well, they release methane.
They do. There's no question about that. But let me take a half a step back and just talk historically a little bit about what we've seen with the dairy sector here in California. And so over time, and this was a study that was done by UC Davis, so we looked at 1964 to 2014. And during that time period, each gallon of milk is now produced today with 88% less land, 89% less water, 45% less greenhouse gases. And because we're farming fewer acres to feed fewer cows, That's less pesticides, less fertilizers, less diesel use and transportation. And as a result of that, the environmental footprint of a gallon of milk has declined significantly across the board. And all that's being accomplished with efficiency, producing more milk with fewer cows. So, we talked a little bit about having 20,000 dairies and, averaging 50 cows. Well, we needed a lot more cows to make the same amount of milk that we do today. In fact, we're producing far more milk with far fewer cows than we had 50 years ago. And from an efficiency standpoint, it has a significant carryover benefit for the environmental footprint of the industry. So that's the starting point. We've got a great story to tell in terms of efficiency and what's caused that efficiency for the most part: better cow care, cow comfort, improved nutrition. Cows are like elite athletes. These cows have nutritionists that design what we call a TMR, a total mixed ration. So think of that as the perfect plate of food for an athlete. If they're a distance runner, going to be a lot of carbs, right? Well, cows aren't distance runners per se, but they do have a diet that will maximize their ability to produce milk. We've identified that and now make sure that the cows are getting that. So they're getting great care. Breeding practices have also had a lot of impact in terms of this efficiency. So just much more efficient production is a good thing from an environmental standpoint. And then, here we are today. Since 2016, we're now focused on what else can we do to reduce water use, to reduce our use of fossil fuels. What else can we do to reduce methane on dairy farms? And there's no question cows create methane, and there's no question methane is a short-lived climate pollutant. But we are taking significant steps to reduce that methane from the back end of the cow, what we call the manure handling practices. We're putting in digesters, we're putting in solid separators, all things that are designed to either capture and put methane to productive use, we can talk more about that, or avoid methane production altogether on the back end of the cow. But then we've got another aspect.
How do you do
to this. It's actually, the technology on the back end's easy. The digesters are a wonderful device tool. What is
a digester?
A digester is basically, simply putting the manure into an anaerobic system. So when I say anaerobic, I mean without air.
Okay. And so we're not talking about the back end of the cow.
We're talking about the manure collection. Yes, we're not talking about putting any devices. Yeah. But we've seen that, right?
Really?
We've seen devices that people were proposing that would go on the front end or the back end of the cow. Yeah, and you get the same reaction. You kind of tilt your head and you go, probably not the greatest invention ever. So, but once the manure is out, we have to manage and handle it. How we manage and handle it can reduce methane. And that's what we're doing here in California, and doing it very successfully. And it's a partnership that we have with the state, both the Air Resources Board, Department of Food and Ag, the Public Utilities Commission's been very helpful, as well as the Energy Commission, to help fund projects that will allow us to dramatically reduce methane.
So but back in the day, the cow waste would just be put in like a pond and it would just sit there, right?
It would sit there, and that pond, because it's in liquid, creates an anaerobic condition where there's no air, right? Underwater. And as a result, it was bubbling up some methane. We're now just capturing that methane. We're putting a cover over the top of that lagoon. Digester existed before. We're just now covering it, capturing the methane. And the amazing thing is we capture that methane, we put it into a pipeline, take it to a centralized location, we clean condition, make it into the equivalent of biomethane, or same basic thing you would find in your home, natural gas, and it goes into heavy duty trucks.
Natural gas.
Real natural gas. Very natural, right? Renewable natural gas. And as a result of that, we're able to displace diesel in heavy duty trucks, which provides tremendous air quality benefits in the San Joaquin Valley, where many of the dairies operate, but also in the LA Basin and in Oakland as trucks head to ports. We're running trucks on renewable natural gas now, cow gas, rather than on diesel fuel. And the benefits of that are amazing.
What is the scope of that? Like how many, I don't know, gallons or whatever. What do they call it?
Diesel gallon equivalents. It's a lot. It's the equivalent of a few 100,000 trucks being able to run on renewable natural gas as opposed to diesel every year, just from the California dairy sector. We're also producing electricity. We've got a project in Fresno that's in partnership with BMW. They're producing electricity using a Bloom fuel cell. running the Bloom fuel cell on dairy biogas, and creating electricity for BMW's electric vehicle charging infrastructure in the state. So BMWs that you see buzzing up and down the highways are running on cow power.
Wow.
We're exploring hydrogen,
Cow power.
We're exploring hydrogen production as well, because that's the future. Renewable natural gas is a transition fuel. It's better than diesel. It's not as good as hydrogen or electricity in the long run. It's probably just as good, if not better than electricity in the short run, because not all electricity is 100% renewable.
Right.
But in the long run, we'll be moving to more electricity production, a lot more hydrogen production, and that hydrogen is going to be used in transportation, probably heavy duty trucks again. And it's going to be used in businesses and maybe even our homes a little bit, blended in with other natural gas in our existing system. So it's we are able and in position to kind of evolve with the state's needs. And so that puts us in a good position to be doing this for a long period of time.
No, yeah, that's fascinating. Wow. Kind of what are some of the legislative issues you guys are looking at this year and kind of working on?
And so, for us, sort of the biggest issue is making sure these partnerships continue. We've been very blessed by the state with significant amount of funding. More than $700 million has gone to dairy methane reduction efforts in the state, between digesters, the alternative manure management practices that we're implementing. And that's given us a tremendous opportunity to match that 2-to-1. So about a $2 billion investment, if you can believe that, just in reducing methane from dairy cattle in California. And we need to continue that. We're a little more than halfway to the goal by 2030. And if we're going to achieve that goal, we're going to need some continued funding from the state. And obviously, it gets more difficult when the state's facing budget deficits the way it is currently. So we're continuing to work with the state, trying to find the funds. Now, having said that, what we also know about the programs that the state has funded to date, they're the most cost-effective programs that the state's funding. The analysis that CARB does every year shows that the dairy digester program in particular is probably arguably the number one program in the state in terms of bang for the buck. I think it's number two in terms of dollars per ton of GHG reduction, about $9 a ton. So it's really low. But more importantly, it's all methane, which is a short-lived climate pollutant, and that's a priority. And it's much more beneficial to reduce methane in the short term than carbon dioxide. So when you couple that in, and you couple in that program, even though it's received a pittance of the total funding in the state, it's not only the most cost-effective, but the most productive in terms of tons of GHG,
right.
What we call
so your
CO2 equivalent.
ROI
is fantastic. Off the top.
Yeah.
It's just fantastic. And I think, key leaders in the legislature like Senator Becker, who chairs the subcommittee in the Senate of budget that has the GGRF fund as part of it, recognizes that. Others recognize the value. And I think, if the state's made a mistake in terms of how we're dealing with climate change issues and policies, it's, we've taken a lot of the funding that is being, created through the cap and trade program. To make cap and trade work, you have to take the funds that are paid into that program and put them back into either methane reduction or carbon dioxide reduction, into GHG reducing projects.
Right.
A lot of that funding is going to projects that have very little greenhouse gas benefit. And that creates, inequities that are going to lead us to probably not being able to achieve our goals by 2030, let alone the goals by 2045.
That'd be a fascinating audit.
It would be a fascinating. It's done. I mean, the state puts out a report every year that talks about each of the different types of projects. They put a dollar amount per ton of reduction on it. It's easy to compare. Some are like ours are at $9 a ton. Others are over $2,000 a ton.
I remember I went to a Silicon Valley Leadership Group conference, and it was when Jerry Brown was running for governor, Gavin Newsom was running for governor. So they had Jerry, Gavin, and they had Vinod Kosalov, the great venture capitalist there, and they were talking about green and how to be green, what to do. And Vinod starts going off about how you just don't go green for green's sake, like you just don't spend money if it doesn't make sense. That's kind of what you're saying. You don't put would you rather put I remember he said would you rather put solar panels on the Moscone Center or down in San Jose? And he was like, your best bang for your buck is where the sun is. Right. So that's kind of what you're saying, is that we need, I guess, to focus our funds on where we're actually getting the most bang.
We're getting the most bang. That's the only way we're going to achieve. California's got very aggressive goals. much more aggressive than anywhere else in the country or anywhere else in the world, much more aggressive than U.S. goals.
Can you put in a scope? Like we hear about this, what are the goals and what does it mean?
It's going to be an expensive transition. So let me just start by saying that. But the goals here in California are to reduce greenhouse gases by, over 40% by 2030, and then get to what they call net zero by 2045. Those are the big, broad goals.
So net zero means?
No additional warming being created. So where carbon is either zeroed out or netted out, right? So you can, find some ways to suck carbon out of the air, for example, carbon capture, that would, provide a way of getting carbon to actual zero.
So they used to talk about like, let's return back to 1990 levels. Are we still talking about that? Or
we've achieved that.
Okay.
So we achieved that back in, a few years early, right around 2020, I think. And so that was the first goal, and the state achieved it. They got a little bit of a help from even pre-COVID. They got a little bit of help from some of the economic downturns that we went through. We're actually seeing some emissions creep back up a little bit after COVID too, because industries went down during COVID, and as they come back, they start creating greenhouse gases again. So we've achieved the 1990. Now we're going for 40% below 1990 levels. And actually, I think the scoping plan talks about 48% below 1990 levels by 2030.
What does that take us back to? 1940?
Great question. I don't know. It's a very, very aggressive. The line, getting to 1990 levels was fairly easy, low-hanging fruit, right? Now we're starting to get into much more difficult reductions that are going to be much more expensive, not just for the state, but for consumers. We're seeing electricity prices skyrocket in the state. Natural gas prices are going up. We're seeing, increased costs for transportation fuel. It's across the board. And, all these things have implications. We're seeing grocery prices increase. And a lot of that is, companies being able to pass along some of their cost increases onto consumers. So, it's an expensive state, as you know, to rent if you don't own a home. It's going to get more expensive as we electrify buildings.
Yeah. I guess, that's a good question. So, as you kind of pointed out, is we produce a lot of dairy here. A lot of our dairy is brought out across the state. What someone may buy a gallon of milk here. I think last time I looked at like $7-8 for a gallon of organic milk.
Yeah, for a gallon organic. Conventional milk's quite a bit cheaper.
Yeah. Maybe someone in California can pay that. Can someone in, Mississippi?
Well, I think even, when you look at the San Joaquin Valley versus the Bay Area, sure. I mean, organic milk is about a 5% market niche here in California. People love it, that, want it. Not everybody can afford it. And $9 is probably
what is the difference?
Low end. In terms of
and how it's made, what the cows are treated.
I don't,
they say those are the organic cows, these are the non-organic.
The primary difference is how they're fed. Yeah. Organic cows have to spend half their time on pasture. Conventional cattle don't. They get fed a mixed ration every day. They don't get to go out on pasture and eat grass. They're eating frankly a more nutritious meal in the barn and producing milk. And that's one of the reasons why they produce more milk than organic, which is one of the reasons why organic's more expensive, because you need more cows to produce the same amount of milk. So less efficient, more expensive, without a doubt. But it's not a solution for everybody. And, we have to remind people, and we can talk about Mississippi, but we've got a Mississippi right here in our own San Joaquin Valley. We've got a lot of poverty, and grocery prices are weighing heavily on the minds of voters today, and rightfully so. I mean, grocery prices are up, and, I think I read this morning that grocery prices are starting to stabilize, right? Well, they've gone up by 30% the last couple of years. So stabilized grocery prices is not necessarily a great thing, right? It's better than the alternative, continuing growth. But now we've got, grocery prices that are 30% more than they were just a few years ago. So, just mitigating some of the inflation's not a good solution. And in some of the polling work we've done with the industry, we've seen that is, the public's very concerned as the state continues to regulate dairies and other agriculture, what that's going to do further to grocery prices. Now, farmers have a hard time passing costs on to their customers, because we're in competitive markets. Right. So we're price takers, not price setters. But, some of it does get passed on without a doubt. Certainly food processors who are directly selling to consumers are in a much better position to pass on some of their costs. We've also seen what I think people refer to as shrinkflation, right? You used to buy a gallon of milk. I'm not sure what you get, a gallon of ice cream. Milk's fine. I'm not sure what you get in a carton of milk today, but it's not a full gallon. I know that. So, the price has stayed the same, but the package has shrunk a little bit. So, those are just ways, for consumer product goods companies to help deal with increasing consumer concern about rising food costs.
Right.
It's real. It shows up in every poll. It's second only to housing costs, and it's slightly above concern about transportation fuel costs, gas costs.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of one interesting, I kind of heard you kind of talk about was the state is helping these farmers kind of transition to the green future. They're not saying you guys have to bear the costs of kind of changing. We're going to provide funds for you guys to change. Can you kind of talk about that and kind of how it's helped, I guess, the industry advance and kind of help reach the state's goals?
Yeah, and so this really came out of a legislative compromise that was struck back in 2016 with Senator Ricardo Lara, who was the author of Senate Bill 1383, which is this short-lived climate pollutant legislation that said we're going to not just reduce greenhouse gases, but we're going to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, methane, and other short-lived climate pollutants by 40% by 2030 as well. And it was a very difficult issue for the dairy industry to swallow. So we started working with Senator Lara, and what we cooked up and came up with is a very productive program that we've been implementing since 2016 that is a incentive-based approach rather than a heavy stick approach with direct regulation. And it's working. And it's working because farmers aren't facing exorbitant costs to come into compliance. They're getting help by the state. In some cases, the technologies are being provided at zero cost to these farmers. With dairy digesters, farmers can actually make a few bucks per cow every year.
Yeah,
They're
talk
getting
about it.
paid a little bit. And so that transition makes it a lot easier than getting a farmer to have to, and the farmers can't go to a bank and get a loan for a digester. There's not a bank in the world that's going to provide a farmer, $8 million to build a digester on the farm. So we've relied on grant money from the state and private investment to come in, make the big investments. Farmers getting a little bit of revenue. And as a result, he's able to make that decision. And that's why we've had such good success. We've got projects on 35% of our farms today. Not all digesters, different types of projects. And, as I said earlier, we've really been focused on the back end of the cow. But, we're going to start focusing on the front end. When cows, they can eat all these different types of waste products because they have a very complex digestive system, what we call ruminant animals.
Right.
But, they also create methane when they're ruminating on their food. So that digestive system creates methane from the front end of the cow as well that we're going to need to mitigate if we're going to be successful going forward. So, we're working on feed additives.
We're talking about like cow burps?
Cow burps. It's exactly what we're talking about. And they need to be mitigated just like the back end of we're dealing with the manure on the back end. And we got our first product approved in the U.S. just a little over a month ago. And it's a feed additive that can reduce the methane in those burps by about 30%. We haven't started feeding it here, but we're working on projects to start feeding that product. It's been available in Europe, Canada, Mexico, and New Zealand, Australia, all over the rest of the world. It's finally available here. It'll be marketed pretty aggressively starting the next few years. But there are other products on the market. There's been efforts to utilize red seaweed as a way to substantially reduce methane. Tannins from winery production and winery waste can also. We found a recent study from UC Davis showed it can reduce methane in dairy cattle. So we've got all these different opportunities with different feed additives. People are trying to bring new ones to market constantly. It's a lengthy process. You've got to show that it's safe for the animals, safe for humans. You've got to go through Food and Drug Administration approval. It takes time to show that these things are safe. It's like a drug trial, right? Because you've got to show it over time, not just 30 days or 60 days, but 5 years, 6 years to show that it's not going to harm the cattle. You also, if you're going to get a farmer to utilize it, can't impact the production of the cow, right? They want to see improvements in production, not digressions there. So it's a lot to take on, but we're starting to work on that front, and incentives are going to be really important there as well. Farmers aren't going to be able to, add $100 per cow per year in terms of feed costs if there isn't some return or benefit to the farmer so that he can stay competitive in the marketplace. But yeah, California is very aggressive, but they're approaching it with this incentive-based approach. And the U.S. government's now following our lead and doing the same thing and putting money into agriculture significantly through the United States Department of Agriculture. So it's catching on, and it works. Others have tried, more stick approaches, and you don't get results with agriculture. We've known that for a long time here in the state. Incentive programs work very well to get farmers to change behavior. Trying to force them to change when there's no way to finance the changes,
right?
It's you're not going to be fruitful in your efforts. That's simple.
Is there, I guess, a recognition here about how important, I guess, dairy is just to humanity in general? About how it's a building block. It's something we all drink when we're kids. It helps us grow. It's necessary, right? Kids in school need it. Yeah.
From a nutrition standpoint, like I said, it's second to none. It's nature's perfect nutritional product. Frankly, it's great. Kids love it. Makes it easy to get kids to drink milk. Especially I've got a 9-year-old stepdaughter who eats 4 chocolate chip cookies before bed every night. But I at least make her do it with a big glass of milk, so she's getting some nutrition. She loves it, and it's a just a great combination. Cheese, same way, goes great with wine. We've already talked about that. Consumers love it. And so it's actually, an easy product that's highly nutritious, a lot of protein, a lot of calcium, a lot of the things we need. But the nutrition's, front and center. It's a great product.
Yeah. And kind of like, what efforts, are made so it's accessible to everyone. And, as we talked about in Central Valley, not everyone can afford $8 gallons of milk.
No, and so it's a big part of the Women, Infants, and Children program, the WIC program. Milk's still a very significant part of that. It's a significant part of the school food lunch program, and making sure kids are getting their daily recommended quantities of milk and dairy products. And then it's, the dairy industry is also stepping up in a major way and donating a lot of milk and dairy products in the San Joaquin Valley to food banks there. And it's a, huge opportunity to make sure that people who aren't getting proper nutrition are getting improved nutrition because of these significant donations. And so the San Joaquin Valley benefits 175,000 jobs, most of which are in the San Joaquin Valley. And then these contributions to the food banks are making sure that, we're providing access to dairy products for some of those folks who may not have access.
Yeah. Kind of working on kind of like your legislative outreach, kind of things like that. Kind of what are some of the things you guys are doing for members and staffers to learn more about the dairies and kind of the business you guys are doing?
So we're constantly doing briefings for legislators, as any good industry group would do, right? But we also are spending a lot of time taking folks out to see the dairies.
What's the closest one?
There's a bunch here just here in South Sacramento. We've got a lot of dairies just north of Galton, south of Sacramento. And then as you move into the San Joaquin Valley, about 95% of our cows are in the San Joaquin Valley. We've got some organic dairies up on the north coast of California.
Clover?
Clover's a big one. Strauss Family Creamery is another big one up there. Point Reyes Blue, one of my favorite cheeses, the Giacomini family's dairy. Wonderful dairies up on the north coast. But, a lot of great operations in the San Joaquin Valley. We love taking people out to see. Most of them are blown away. It's not at all what they've expect to see, not what they've necessarily heard from folks who are anti-dairy, but they come out, they see for themselves, see the cow care that's being conducted and what's taking place on the dairies. They actually meet the families, get rid of this industrial dairy corporate image. These are all family-owned operations. Many of them are owned and operated by multiple generations of the same family. Lots of where we've got 2 brothers working with dad, or 3 different sides of the family that are working together. One brother farms, or one cousin farms. The other one does the dairy farming, and the last one does the the business aspects of the operation. So through economies of scale, they've been able to find ways to be more competitive, which has allowed them to continue doing what they love. Like I said, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah,
it's not just a job for these folks. They raise their families on these properties. It's a way of life for farmers to bring their families up, and hope that the next generation's going to want to be involved. We're seeing that more and more. I think, in Wisconsin, you see that even less, right? Where the kids are going off to school and not wanting to come back to the family farm, because it's particularly there. It's a tough lifestyle because, you're on that dairy 365 days a year. Those cows are going to get milked 2 to 3 times a day, 24/7. And so it's a lot of work, and you can't have a lot of outside labor because there's such small operations. So, I've talked to dairy farmers who didn't leave their properties for vacations with the family because they can't. Don't leave until their oldest daughter gets married, and they want to go to the wedding for a couple of days, and then they've got to get friends or family to cover for them. So it's dedicated lifestyle, to say the least.
The kind of like, how many cows are on your? I think you already answered this. But how many cows are on like a dairy like you're describing?
Here in California, they average about 1,500 cows, but we have dairies with 200, and we have dairies with
then you got to rotate them around
8,000
to get milk and
and so the cows have to be brought in. They have to get fed. So it's constant. One barn's getting fed at a time, and while the barn that's not getting fed, they get sent off to the milking parlor to get milk. They stand in line, wait their turn. Get on the carousel to get milked, and then they're returned to their barn and usually fed another meal. And so that's kind of the life cycle, with a cow on a daily basis, or what the day looks like for a typical cow. Nice, cool, for the most part, conditions, fans, misters to keep them cool in the hot summer months. 3 square meals a day, all they can eat, and all the fresh water they can drink. So. Cow comfort's a big part of what dairy farm families do.
So do the cows move themselves? Like they know when to go, where to go, or do they still have like, cattle dog? Or?
No, they, a worker will go out, open the gates. The cows know the cows want to get milked. I mean,
they have to.
Absolutely, right? It's building up in their bodies, and they want that relief, and so they like getting milked. We're starting to move to technology, what we call automated milkers. And the difference there is a cow can go get milk 7 times a day if she wants to. Where in a traditional dairy, it's going to be 2 or 3 times a day. But with these automated milk operations, she can walk up to a milker and get milk 7 times a day if that's what she wants.
Wow.
So, some cows really want that, others less.
How many gallons of milk does a cow produce?
You're going to get me on that one. A lot. We measure everything in hundredweights, and I think a gallon weighs just less than 9 pounds. So cows are able to produce a lot of gallons of milk each year, thousands of gallons of milk each year. And so, but I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Yeah, fascinating. There's a lot of different egg groups up here. You learn about the pistachios, the almonds. Every group has its own. The rice growers. Kind of how do you guys work collaboratively? Because you guys are after a lot of the same resources and working a lot of the same issues.
Absolutely. The ag industry works very well together. And part of that is reality that we have to, because as we already talked about, there's just fewer legislators from the San Joaquin agricultural regions of the state. And as a result of that, we've got to work together to make sure, that we're being able to make sure that we have the opportunity to farm in this state. So we do work very well together. And there is a lot of reliance on each other. As I said, the wine industry, the pomegranate industry, the citrus industry, every industry benefits from having dairies in California because we provide a way for them to deal with some of their waste streams without having to have to pay to landfill it. Or now because it's organic, they wouldn't be able to landfill it. They'd have to deal with it some other way. Almond hulls are the best example, right? We grow a lot of almonds in this state. Another really big commodity, second probably only to dairy in the state. And, we eat the nut, right? There's a hard shell around that nut, and there's a hull, a fibrous hull around the shell. Those hulls now account for close to 10% of all dairy feed in California. So here you've got a product, it would be a waste product, but now it's a value added.
Well, they used to
feed.
Burn it.
I'm not even sure what they used to do. They've been feeding it to cattle for a long, long time. But that reduces our need to grow alfalfa. We grow very little alfalfa for dairy cattle in California today. Get criticized about alfalfa a lot, but we really aren't utilizing a lot of alfalfa in the industry. Some, but not anywhere near the numbers that we saw previously. We've seen alfalfa production go down substantially because we've been able to replace it with other commodities that we can feed cattle that are lower cost and provide a benefit with no footprint. Right? You're growing almonds, so the footprint's there. No additional water, no additional pesticides, no additional anything to get that feed supply for the dairy cow. And it's nice for the almond growers. It's another revenue stream for an almond grower. You'll still see the shells are being utilized for different things. When you grow almonds, you also get things called stick piles, because when they harvest almonds, they bring a lot of tree trimmings and other things with them and those stick piles have to get dealt with as well at the almond haulers. So lots of different issues in agriculture, and then finding solutions for them by working collaboratively has always been a really big part of the industry in the state, and we collaborate on our lobbying activity as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, session starting again next week, final 30 days. Anything you guys are working on here in the last 30 days?
So we're still keeping our hopes alive for some additional funding in some of the budget trailer bills for some of the things that are important to the farming community. Farmer program, the efforts to reduce dairy methane, healthy soils programs, other funding we can get into programs that will help agriculture, stay sustainable and stay compliant with the state's increasing regulation.
Can you give us a scope of what kind of the funding you guys were looking at?
Yeah. So the farmer program's not directly focused on greenhouse gases. It's focused more on criteria or pollutants. But changing out tractors to more efficient tractors or electrifying certain operations on our farms, we're doing that a lot in the dairy sector. And so that funding has been critical, incentive funding to help bring about these transformations on the farms. That program needs easily $200 million a year to be successful.
$200 million.
$200 million to be successful. And, with Governor Brown, we were getting over $100 million a year for dairy methane reduction. That's still a number that's probably the appropriate level. CDFA just put close to $80 million on the street for dairy methane reduction efforts. Most of that was USDA money. 58 million of that was federal money. So we're starting to see the state funding dry up a little bit for greenhouse gas and dairy. We need to see that get back to a reasonable level so that we can continue implementing projects as we approach 2030. Funding on what we call an enteric methane reduction programs, the next piece, that's that front end, the belches of the cow. Enteric emissions. Senator Becker's been trying to find funding for setting up an enteric program. I was funding that he was successful in getting into the budget last year. That funding, $25 million, got pulled back because of the budget crisis, or most of it got pulled back. So we're trying to replace that. And that's probably the most critical, because we've got a great handle on the back end of that cow. We need to get start working on reducing methane from the front end and getting incentive dollars to get farmers to utilize these feed additives. Is going to be a critical piece for us going forward.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Definitely learned a lot about an area we don't normally see, and a pleasure talking with you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.